Hi, my name is Matt, and today I'm going to be showing you how to program what has become known as the Dilla-Feel in Logic Pro, of course referring to the late great producer and beatmaker, J Dilla. Now, there are a lot of misconceptions out there about what exactly the Dilla-Feel is and about how exactly he achieved it. Many people mistakenly believe that he just simply didn't quantize his beats or that he just added a bunch of swing to all the drums. But really, there's a lot more to it than that. Dilla's beats are extremely tight, and although they may not sound like it, they're actually perfectly on a grid. The key phrase there is a grid. It's not necessarily the grid that you're used to, but it's still a grid. Dilla approached musical time in a way that no one had ever done before, and that's what I'm going to try and show you how to replicate. See, what's at the root of the Dilla-Feel is this conflict between straight time and swung time across each and every element of the beat. See, to Dilla, every element, whether it be the kick, the hi-hat, the loop, the bass, lived in a different spot on the grid than the other elements. However, within each element, the time is constant and it's on its own grid. Like the kick is on a kick grid, the bass is on a bass grid. And that's the key to why Dilla's beats sound so tight. Even though this whole beat together is technically not in time with itself, it's still so tight and quantized that it gives you this jerky, head-bobbing feel. That's what I'm going to try and show you here, how to replicate that feel on your own. So I'm going to start by showing you this beat I made as it sounds perfectly straight against the grid. It goes like this. Now I'm going to play the exact same beat, but this time it's going to have the Dilla-Feel. Alright, so let me show you what I did to get there, and I'm only going to use Logic's built-in quantization presets and a little bit of nudging. I'm going to start with the kick. Now, of course, Dilla, who worked exclusively on the MPC, didn't have access to Logic's quantization presets. However, we can use them to pull off the same principles that he abided by. So with this kick pattern, I wanted to swing pretty hard, so I'm going to use the 16th note E swing option. Now, when you think about it, swing A through swing F are really just different percentages of swing in the same way that Dilla would have had access to on his MPC. A through F being like 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, so on. Now, Dilla, of course, had access to 0 through 100 on a sliding scale, which you can do in Logic, but for sake of simplicity, we're just going to stick with these 5 presets. We're going to do 16th note A through F and 8th note E through F. So moving on, I'm going to take this shaker and I'm going to quantize it to the other end of the swing spectrum. I'm going to go with 16th note swing B. Now, this is not quite fully straight, but it is no doubt much straighter than what we had on the kick. So now those two elements together sound like this. Of course, it's still much too early to really get a feel from this, but let's see what happens now when we add a snare. Now, I'm sure you know that snares typically hit on the quarter notes of 2 and 4 in each bar, which doesn't leave us with a ton of room for any swing because you can't swing on a quarter note technically. However, we can play around with time in a different way, like Dilla did. I'm going to start by quantizing this part perfectly to a quarter note. But in the spirit of Dilla, I don't want the snare sitting perfectly on that quarter note grid because that's boring and stale and has no feel to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take every snare hit and I'm going to delay it by exactly 30 ticks. Now, the snare is technically out of time in the sense that it doesn't perfectly lie in the typical grid. However, the amount of time between each snare hit is perfectly consistent still. So it really is quantized and it is on a grid. It's just a grid made up of much smaller intervals than we're used to. Usually people divide a bar into 4 quarter notes, 8 eighth notes, and 16 16th notes. Dilla's out here dividing bars into 128 separate notes. All right, let's move on to the hats now, where we can really mess around with musical time. I'm going to start by quantizing these hats to a value I haven't used yet. Let's go with 8th note swing B, and that sounds like this. All right, fine, but let's not stop there. Now let's see, what if we took these quarter notes and delay them a good amount? How about 65 ticks? now we're really starting to get that jerking feel. And always keep in mind, these hats are still in time and quantized. The key is that they're just quantized to a different grid. The spacing between each hit, of course, is consistent. Again, that's why it's so tight. Now to wrap up this drum loop, I'm just going to throw in a few pickup snare hits, and let's quantize them to another value we haven't used yet. Let's go a 16th note F. And now what we have going on here in this whole drum loop is the conflict between each element, as each element is aligned to a different grid with its different and own unique amount of swing. They're all aligned to a grid, but just different grids. So the full beats together now sounds like this. All right, so now that we have the drum loop built, we've got to throw a sample in there. So let's do it in the way that Dilla loved to do it. And that's by using a technique called micro chopping. Now, most producers, when they find a sample, they just line it up, maybe change the tempo a little bit, and just loop it to the drums. Dilla decided to take that a step further. So I'm going to show you with the sample that I found, and here it is as is. Now I'm going to take that sample and I'm going to chop it every time a new note or harmonic action happens, hence micro chopping. And now I'm going to take these chopped regions and convert them into a new sampler instrument where each chop will be assigned to its own key value. This now totally lets me reimagine the sample, and as Dilla would do, I can now create an entirely new melodic part out of it. Lastly, let's return to timing once again, and for this chopped sample, I'm going to quantize it to its own grid, just like I did with each drum element. As a matter of fact, let's see what happens if I quantize it to the perfect grid. What happens if I quantize it to perfect eighth notes, no swing, no delay, just straight down the middle. What that's going to do at this point is just continue to add to this conflict going on with each element of this loop. So when all is said and done, the full beat sounds like this. And once again, to compare it to the straight drum loop. So there you have it. By applying these principles of Dilla time, we've given a once bland and boring beat a ton of life and a ton of feel. So next time you're programming your beats, remember that you don't always have to stick to that basic and expected grid. Experiment, mess around with the time like J Dilla did. You never know what new and fresh feel you're going to end up with. So I hope this tutorial helped. If you have any further questions, please leave a comment and I'll be glad to clarify anything that may not have made sense to you. Thank you for watching and have a great day.